Amma's screams tore through the village, echoing into the vast, unforgiving sky. Her body shook with grief, her soul shattered into 1,000 pieces. The love of her life, her precious kofi, was gone. The child who had filled her world with laughter and light was snatched from her in a cruel twist of fate. One moment, she had been holding him close, his small hands reaching for hers, and the next, he was ripped away, his life taken by cold, uncaring hands. The news hit like a blow to her chest, leaving her breathless and broken. The villagers spoke of a senseless act of violence, a tragedy that no one could explain, no one could understand. But for Amma, none of that mattered. She didn't care about the why or the how. She only cared that Kofi was gone. She rushed through the village, calling his name, her voice cracking with each desperate cry. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if the world itself had held its breath. Kofi's laughter, which had once filled the air, was replaced by an unbearable emptiness. She stumbled through her home, her eyes darting from his empty cradle to his scattered toys, now just painful reminders of the loss. Her heart ached with a rawness she had never known, and every breath felt like a weight pressing down on her. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her body wrapped with the kind of grief that felt like it could swallow her whole. In the midst of her devastation, a voice, soft and sinister, whispered through the wind. "I can bring him back." It was a promise, a tantalizing offer that Amma couldn't ignore, though she didn't fully understand the cost. Amma couldn't escape the voice. It whispered to her in the quiet moments of her grief, beckoning her toward something she couldn't name. It wasn't a voice of comfort or sympathy, but a voice of possibility, an offer of hope, no matter how strange or impossible it sounded. Each night, as she sat by the fire, her mind consumed with the ache of Kofi's absence, the voice grew clearer, louder, more insistent. "You can have him back," it whispered again and again. "Just come to me. I can make it happen." The idea both terrified and fascinated Amma. The voice spoke of a woman, a witch who lived deep in the forest, far beyond the boundaries of the village Nera, they called her. Some said she was a healer. Others whispered she was a dark sorceress who dealt in forbidden magic. But Amma had no time for caution. She had lost everything. She had no one left to turn to but this mysterious woman who could return what was lost. Night after night, the whispering continued, filling her with a strange mixture of dread and hope. It gnawed at her, feeding the emptiness in her soul until, finally, she could no longer resist. One morning, she packed a small bag and set off toward the forest, heart racing with fear and anticipation. The path was narrow and twisted, the trees thick and dark, as if the forest itself was alive, watching her every step. With each step she took, the forest seemed to close in on her, the shadows growing deeper and darker, but she pressed on. She had made a choice. She would do whatever it took to bring Kofi back, even if it meant walking into the heart of darkness. The deeper Amma ventured into the forest, the more the air seemed to change. The light from the outside world seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie glow that radiated from the thick trees. The sound of birds, once filling the air, had gone silent. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it a strange energy that seemed to draw her closer to her destination. It was as though the forest itself was guiding her, urging her forward. The path became narrower, the trees more twisted, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands, as if trying to stop her. She pressed on, though fear gripped her heart, until finally she saw it, Nera's hut. The sight of it was enough to freeze her in place. It was an ancient structure, built from the dark wood of the forest, shrouded in an unnatural mist. The air around it was thick with magic, and Amma could feel the weight of the power that emanated from it. Nera was waiting, standing in the doorway of the hut, her glowing eyes locking onto Amma's with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "I knew you would come." Nera's voice was low, calm, and filled with an unsettling confidence. You seek to bring back the dead, but nothing comes without a price. Amma swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. I'll pay anything, she whispered, her voice trembling. Nira smiled, the kind of smile that chilled Amma's blood. Anything? She asked, her voice dripping with dark amusement. Let's see if you truly understand the cost. Nira's presence seemed to fill the entire clearing. She stepped aside, gesturing for Amma to enter the hut. Come in, child, she said, her voice smooth and hypnotic. You've come seeking what can never be truly returned. But I can give you what you want at a price. Amma hesitated, her mind swirling with fear and doubt, but the yearning for kofi drove her forward. She stepped into the hut, and the door slammed shut behind her with an eerie finality. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs, incense, and something darker, something ancient. The walls were lined with strange symbols, etched into the wood like warnings. Nira stood before a large cauldron, stirring something that bubbled with an unnatural glow. Tell me, child, Nira continued, what are you willing to sacrifice to bring your son back? Amma swallowed hard, her heart racing. She had already made her decision, but the words hung heavy on her tongue. My soul, she whispered, almost to herself. Nira's eyes gleamed with wicked delight. Your soul or something even more precious. You may never truly know what you've lost until it's gone. Amma stood in the shadow of Nira, her heart pounding in her chest as the witch stirred the glowing cauldron in front of her. The air in the hut was thick with the smell of herbs and dark magic, and Amma felt a shiver run down her spine. The fire crackled softly, its orange glow casting eerie shadows across the walls, illuminating the strange symbols that adorned them. Amma's thoughts were clouded with grief and desperation. Nothing mattered but bringing kofi back. Nira turned to face her, her eyes glowing with a strange, unnatural light. You are willing to pay the price, the witch said, her voice low and almost hypnotic. But understand this, there is no going back once the deal is made. Amma swallowed hard, the words sinking deep into her heart. I don't care, she whispered. I need him back. I'll pay anything. Nira smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent a chill through Amma's bones. The witch extended a long, delicate hand toward the cauldron, and the flames flickered higher. Very well, Nira murmured. But you must understand, my dear, that there are always consequences. Amma didn't care about the consequences. She only cared about her son. The witch's words hung in the air, a dark promise that filled the room with an oppressive weight. What is the cost? Amma asked, her voice trembling, though her resolve remained strong. Tell me what I must give. Nira's voice seemed to echo in the small, dimly lit hut. You must give up your humanity, she said, her eyes never leaving Amma's face. The part of you that is pure, that feels love, that knows joy. In exchange, I will return your son. The words hit Amma like a blow to the chest, knocking the breath out of her. She felt the weight of them sink deep into her soul. The price was steep, more than she had ever imagined. What do you mean? Amma asked, her voice barely a whisper, her heart racing. Nira stepped closer, the air growing colder as she did. You will no longer feel the things you once did. You will no longer know the warmth of love, the sweetness of joy, or the agony of loss. You will be something else. The witch's eyes glittered with dark amusement. But your son will return. And that is all that matters, isn't it? Amma closed her eyes, the weight of the choice pressing heavily on her chest. She had to make a decision. Kofi was gone, and this was the only way to get him back. A part of Amma wanted to run, to turn away from the witch and the bargain she was offering. But her heart screamed for kofi. She couldn't live without him. Her heart was already broken, and the idea of being numb to the pain felt like a relief. But what if she couldn't live with the emptiness? What if losing her humanity meant losing herself forever? Amma's hands shook as she reached for Nira's outstretched hand, her heart torn between the pull of her son and the dread of what she was about to give up. She had already lost so much kofi, her joy, her peace. Nira held her gaze, her eyes penetrating, as though she could see into Amma's very soul. "The bargain is made," the witch said softly, "and once you make it, there is no turning back." With trembling hands, Amma nodded, her voice barely above a whisper, "I accept." The moment the words left her lips, she felt a surge of dark energy fill the room, as though the very air was charged with power. She could feel it enter her, seeping into her veins, and for a fleeting moment, the pain of Kofi's loss eased. It was a relief she had longed for, but at the same time, she felt a hollow emptiness within herself that she couldn't explain. The world seemed to tilt as the darkness closed in around her. Kofi was about to return, but what had she truly given up? Was it worth it? The voices of doubt whispered in her mind, but she ignored them. The witch began her incantation, her hands moving in a slow, deliberate pattern, and Amma could feel the magic taking hold of her. She had made the choice. She had accepted the price. As the magic swirled around her, the room seemed to darken. The flames in the cauldron burning brighter, casting long shadows that stretched across the walls. Kofi's form flickered before her, and for a brief moment, Amma felt her heart leap in her chest. There he was, standing before her, his small hands reaching out to her. The sight of him alive, vibrant, was everything she had hoped for. She stepped forward, her arms open, but as she reached for him, something inside her recoiled. Kofi didn't seem to see her. His eyes were vacant, his expression blank. It was as though he was not truly there, not really alive. Amma froze, her heart sinking as a wave of realization hit her. He wasn't the same. He couldn't be the same. She felt it in the pit of her stomach, the gnawing, growing fear that something was terribly wrong. The magic had worked, but at what cost? She had brought Kofi back, but the price of her soul, of her humanity, had transformed him. He was no longer the child she had loved. She reached out for him, but he didn't respond. He didn't even look at her. "What's happened to you?" she whispered, but her voice echoed unanswered in the cold, silent room. Amma stood frozen, her arms stretched out, but Kofi did not move toward her. The warmth she had hoped to feel was absent, replaced by an overwhelming coldness that seemed to settle deep within her bones. She felt her heart sink as she studied his blank expression, his vacant eyes. It was as if he didn't recognize her. "Kofi?" Amma whispered his name, but the child she had longed for did not respond. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her hands trembling as she took a step closer, hoping, praying that this was some cruel mistake. She reached out to touch his cheek, but the moment her fingers brushed against his skin, a wave of ice washed over. Kofi felt like a ghost, a mere shadow of the boy she had once known. Her chest tightened with panic. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice breaking. But Kofi remained silent, his eyes distant, as though looking right through her. Her heart felt like it was being ripped out of her chest, torn apart by the realization that this was not her son. He was something else, something that was never meant to return. She had made the deal, and now she was paying the price. The joy of having Kofi back quickly turned to horror. Had she truly made the right choice? Was the magic worth the emptiness she now felt? The days that followed were filled with confusion and growing despair. Amma tried to care for Kofi, to shower him with the love she had once given him, but the warmth she had once felt for him was gone. Every time she held him, he felt colder, more distant. It was as though a barrier had been built between them, one she couldn't break through. Kofi would sit quietly by the fire, his small hands limp in his lap, staring off into the distance. There was no joy, no laughter. He didn't smile, didn't reach for her. Amma would try to feed him, try to coax him into speaking, but he wouldn't react. "Why won't you speak to me?" She cried one night, her voice filled with anguish. But he said nothing. She began to feel something inside her unravel, a gnawing fear that grew stronger each day. It was as though the bargain had stolen not just Kofi's soul, but hers as well. The warmth of motherhood had turned to ice, and the magic that had returned her son had taken something far more precious in return. The emptiness gnawed at her heart. She couldn't understand it. She had Kofi back. Why did it feel as though she had lost everything? Was there still a way to undo the damage? Or had she already crossed a point of no return? The village, once a place of solace, now seemed foreign to Amma. She no longer felt connected to it, to the people who had once offered their support. They looked at her with pity, their eyes filled with fear and confusion. She had become an outcast. In her own home, the whispers followed her wherever she went. "She's changed," they would say. "She's not the same." Amma could feel the weight of their judgment on her shoulders, the distance growing between her and everyone she once knew. But it wasn't just the villagers who had changed, it was Kofi. The boy she had fought so hard to bring back was now a stranger, a ghost of her past. One evening, as she watched him sitting by the fire, his cold eyes fixed on the flames, a realization hit her like a thunderclap. She had traded her humanity for his return, and in doing so, she had lost more than she could ever comprehend. Kofi was not the same, and neither was she. The love she had once felt for him was gone, replaced by an unfeeling, empty void. She had exchanged her soul for his life, but in doing so, she had lost herself. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest. She had made the choice in her desperation, but now the price seemed too high. Was there any way to undo it? Was there a way to return to the woman she once was? One night, as Amma sat alone by the fire, the voice returned, the same voice that had whispered to her in her grief. It was soft, almost soothing, but there was an unmistakable edge of darkness. "You wanted him back," the voice murmured. "But now you see the cost." Amma's heart raced as she looked around, but there was no one there. It was the same voice she had heard in the wind, the one that had promised to return Kofi to her. She had believed it was a chance for redemption, a way to undo the unbearable pain of losing her child. But now the truth was clear. She had not only lost Kofi, but had also given up everything that made her human. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, her voice filled with regret. The fire crackled, and the darkness seemed to close in on her. "You cannot undo the bargain," the voice whispered again, its tone cruel and final. "The price has been paid." The weight of those words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating her. The reality of her choice settled in. She could feel the darkness creeping into her very soul. There was no turning back now. She had given everything, and there was no way to reclaim it. Amma had become a ghost in her own home. Her presence, once full of warmth and love, now felt like an eerie shadow that haunted the house. The walls that had once held the laughter of her son now felt cold, lifeless. Kofi sat by the fire every night, his small figure motionless, his eyes empty. He no longer came to her for comfort, no longer smiled when she spoke to him. His silence was suffocating. Amma watched him, her heart breaking, as the reality of what she had done settled deeper into her bones. She had made a deal with a witch, believing that she could return her child to life. But in doing so, she had not only traded her humanity, but had also brought back a Kofi who was distant, hollow, and lost. She tried to hold him, to feel the warmth she had once cherished, but he felt cold, so cold. The love she once had for him, the deep maternal bond, was gone. She was left with a child who didn't recognize her, and the overwhelming emptiness of a bargain that had cost her everything. "What have I done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She could feel the sharp, gnawing ache of regret growing inside her. There was no escaping it. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't undo the damage. The witch had taken more from her than she could have ever imagined. Each day, Amma could feel herself slipping further away. The numbness that had first settled inside her was now spreading, like a sickness that was slowly overtaking her body and soul. She no longer felt the joys of the world, the warmth of the sun, the beauty of the sky, or the laughter of children in the village. All of it felt distant, meaningless. She had sacrificed everything she had been for the return of Kofi, but now she could see the price she had paid. She wandered the village, but the familiar faces she had once known now seemed to turn away. They whispered behind her back, their gazes filled with pity and fear. "She's not the same," they said. "Something's wrong with her." Amma could feel their eyes on her, their judgment piercing through her like daggers. She had become a stranger to them, a broken woman consumed by grief and magic. But it wasn't just the villagers who had changed, it was her. She had lost her connection to the world around her, to the very essence of what made her human. "What happened to me?" she asked herself as she looked at her reflection in the village pond. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow, and the warmth she once carried seemed to have drained from her completely. She had given up everything for Kofi, and now she was nothing more than a shell of the woman she had been. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Amma sat alone in the small garden that once brought her peace. The wind blew gently, rustling the leaves, but there was no comfort in the sound. Kofi sat nearby, staring into the distance, as he had done for days now. Amma watched him, her heart aching with the weight of her decision. The pain of losing him had been unbearable, but the pain of knowing that he was now a mere shadow of the child she had once known was even worse. She had fought so hard to bring him back, but now that he was here, he was not the son she remembered. He was a stranger, distant and cold, and his presence only reminded her of the irreversible damage she had done. "What do I do now?" she whispered to the wind, hoping for an answer that would never come. She had no one left. She had sacrificed everything, her soul, her humanity, her love for a fleeting moment of hope. But now that hope had turned to ash in her mouth. Was this what she had wanted? Was the price of Kofi's return truly worth it? The silence that followed her question was suffocating. In the dead of night, the whispers returned. They filled the silence of Amma's thoughts, creeping into her mind like an unwelcome presence. "You made your choice," they murmured, their voices soft and serpentine. "And now you must live with the consequences." Amma tried to ignore them, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They spoke of the bargain she had struck, of the price she had paid, and of the emptiness that would follow her for the rest of her days. "You cannot undo it," they hissed. "You cannot take it back." The words echoed in her mind, over and over again, until she felt as though they were seeping into her very bones. She had no escape. She had made the deal. She had lost everything. The darkness grew heavier around her, and for the first time since the witch had made the offer, Amma felt the full weight of the cost. She had no one to turn to, no way to undo the damage she had caused. Kofi was with her, but he was not the child she had wanted back. And she, too, was lost, forever changed by the bargain she had made. She could feel her soul slipping further away, leaving her empty and hollow. There was no redemption, no way to bring back what she had lost. Amma stood in the doorway of her home, staring out into the horizon as the world around her seemed to fall into an eerie silence. The sun had set, casting long shadows over the land, but no warmth touched her heart. Kofi sat in the corner of the room, his back turned to her, his gaze fixed on the wall. It had been days since he had said a word, his presence more like an empty shell than the child she had once known. The house, once a place of laughter and love, now felt hollow. Each corner, each object reminded her of what had been lost, not just the death of her son, but the life she had once had. She thought of the village, the people she had known all her life, and how they no longer looked at her with sympathy, but with fear. They whispered when she passed, their voices tinged with something darker, something more accusing. The truth was plain now. Kofi had returned, but he was not the son she had lost. He was something else, something that could never be truly hers again. As Amma's eyes filled with tears, she realized that she had not only lost Kofi, but she had lost herself as well. She had made a deal with the witch to undo the unbearable pain of loss, but in doing so, she had lost what made her human. There was no going back. No matter how much she tried to hold on to the fragments of her former life, they slipped through her fingers like sand. The days blurred together in a haze of confusion and sorrow. Amma wandered through the village, numb to the world around her. The once familiar paths seemed foreign now, the faces of her neighbors strange and distant. The whispers followed her wherever she went, their words sharp and painful. "She's not the same," they said. "There's something wrong with her." Amma could feel the weight of their stares, their judgment pressing down on her like a physical force. She didn't care. She had made her choice. Kofi was with her, and that should have been enough. But it wasn't. Every moment she spent with him only deepened the emptiness inside her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something vital, something that had been taken from her the moment she made the deal with Nira. The more she tried to care for Kofi, the more distant he became. The love that had once been so natural, so easy, was now a foreign concept. She reached for him one evening, her heart full of longing, but he recoiled, his eyes cold and empty. The warmth she had once known was gone, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find it again. She had brought Kofi back, but at the cost of her own soul. She had traded everything for the chance to hold him again, but now she realized it was a hollow victory. Kofi had returned, but so had the darkness. Amma's despair deepened as the days passed. She could feel herself slipping further away from the woman she once was. The world seemed to close in around her, the village, her home, and even Kofi becoming distant and unfamiliar. The whispers in her mind grew louder, more insistent, urging her to face the truth. "You've made your choice," the voice echoed. "You cannot undo it." The weight of the magic that had once promised to bring her peace now felt like a suffocating force, pressing down on her from all sides. She had made a deal with the witch, believing that she could reclaim what she had lost. But she had been wrong. The magic that had returned Kofi to her had come with a price, one that could never be paid. Amma could feel the emptiness inside her growing with each passing day, the loss of her humanity more apparent than ever. Was there still a way out? Could she find redemption? Or was she destined to live out her days in this cold, empty shell of a life? Every answer seemed to lead her further down a path of despair. The power that had brought her son back had drained everything from her. Now, all she had was a hollow, aching soul and the ghost of the child she had once loved. One evening, as Amma sat by the fire, the room cold and silent, she felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Kofi stood in the doorway, his small figure outlined by the dim light of the fire. His eyes were empty, his face expressionless. He was no longer the child she had fought so hard to bring back. He was something else, something dark and empty. Amma reached out to him, her hand trembling, but he didn't move. He stood there, distant and cold, as though he were a part of the shadows themselves. "Kofi," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "please come back to me." But he didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge her. Amma's heart shattered, as the realization hit her like a physical blow. Kofi was gone. The child she had lost was never truly returned. What stood before her was nothing but a hollow shell, a shadow of the boy she had loved. The truth was inescapable. She had made the bargain, and now she would live with its consequences. She had brought Kofi back, but she had lost herself in the process. There was no redemption. There was no going back. She had sacrificed everything for the chance to hold him again, and now she was left with nothing. Amma stood at the edge of the village, staring into the distance, her heart heavy with the weight of her choices. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the land, but there was no warmth in the light. The village was quiet, too quiet, and the faces of the villagers, once filled with sympathy, now seemed distant and cold. They no longer looked at her with kindness or understanding. Instead, their eyes were filled with fear, their whispers sharp and accusing. "She's changed," they muttered. "There's something wrong with her." The words pierced through Amma's heart like a blade. She had become an outcast in her own village, a woman consumed by grief and magic, a woman who had sacrificed everything for the return of her son. Kofi had returned, yes, but he was not the same. The child she had fought so desperately to bring back had become a stranger, cold, distant, and unreachable. He no longer smiled, no longer sought her embrace. Kofi was gone, replaced by something hollow. The love she had once felt for him had been replaced by an empty void, a darkness that threatened to consume her. She had made the deal with Nira, thinking it would bring her son back, thinking it would restore her life. But now the truth was undeniable. She had lost more than she could ever have imagined. She had lost herself, her humanity, her connection to the world, and the love she had once shared with her child. Kofi's return had come at a cost, and that price was far steeper than she had ever realized. Amma's mind swirled with confusion and despair. The voice that had whispered to her in the dark, the voice that had promised her Kofi's return, now seemed like a cruel mockery. She had listened to it in her grief, had followed its call like a desperate child searching for a way out of her pain. But now she could see the truth. The price of the bargain had been more than she could bear. She had given up her humanity, her essence, her soul, for a momentary glimpse of the child she had lost. The magic that had returned Kofi to her had drained her, left her empty and cold. She had hoped that Kofi would bring back the warmth, love, the joy that had once filled her life, but instead, he had only deepened the emptiness inside her. The more she tried to reach out to him, the more she realized that the bond they once shared was gone. Kofi didn't need her. He didn't even acknowledge her anymore. She had become a stranger to him, and he to her. He was no longer the boy she had cherished. He was something else, something lost in the darkness that had consumed them both. Amma's heart ached with a sorrow so deep that it felt like a physical wound. She had made the ultimate sacrifice, and now she had nothing left. Not even Kofi. As the days passed, Amma withdrew further into herself. The villagers' whispers became louder, their stares more pronounced, but she didn't care. Nothing mattered anymore. The world around her felt like it was slipping away, like she was fading into the background of a life she no longer recognized. She had nothing left to give, no one left to turn to. Kofi was with her, but he might as well have been a ghost. The child she had fought to bring back was not the same. The magic that had returned him had also taken something vital from him. He no longer felt real, and neither did she. The more time passed, the more Amma felt like a shadow, walking through the motions of life without truly living. The warmth of her love had been replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness, and nothing seemed to break through the walls she had built around herself. She thought back to the moment she had made the deal with Nira, the witch's words echoing in her mind. "There is always a price," the witch had said. She had paid that price, but it wasn't worth the cost. She had lost Kofi, and in doing so she had lost herself. There was no redemption, no way to undo the damage. The magic had drained her, leaving only a shell behind. She had sacrificed everything for the illusion of bringing her son back, but now she saw the truth. Kofi was never truly hers again. One evening, as the last light of the day faded, Amma stood by the edge of the village, looking out at the horizon. She could see the forest in the distance, the place where it all began, the place where she had made the deal with Nira. It was calling to her, but not with the promise of redemption, as it had before. Now it felt like a place of finality, place where all choices ended. She had given up everything, and there was no going back. The world seemed still, as if waiting for her to make one final decision. Kofi sat by the fire, staring into the flames, his expression unreadable. She watched him, her heart aching with the realization that this was not the son she had brought back. He was a reflection of what she had lost, a shadow of the boy she had cherished. The weight of her choices pressed down on her chest. She had done everything she could to bring Kofi back, but now she saw that some things could never be undone. The bargain she had struck with the witch had cost her more than she could ever have imagined. She had no power to fix it. There was no magic that could return what had been taken. She was lost, forever trapped in the shadow of her own choices. Amma could no longer deny the crushing weight of her choices. She had spent the last few weeks living in a haze, moving through the motions of life without truly existing. Every day felt like an eternity, her every step heavy with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. Kofi was still with her, yet he felt as distant as the stars. She could see him sitting by the fire, his eyes fixed on the flames, his face unreadable. The warmth that should have radiated from her son had long since gone. The bond they once shared, strong and pure, had vanished, replaced by an empty shell of the child she had lost. She could feel the hollow ache in her chest, the yearning for the connection that had been taken from her. But no matter how much she tried to reach out to him, to rekindle the love that had once burned so brightly, it was gone. She had done everything she could, given everything she had, and yet she could not reclaim what had been lost. Kofi's presence, though physically here, was a ghost, and with every passing day, the realization became more apparent. She could never bring back the son she had loved so dearly. She had traded her humanity for the illusion of a second chance, but it had been a cruel joke. The bargain had been her undoing. Amma's isolation grew with each passing day. The villagers, once her friends, now treated her with a mixture of pity and fear. Their avoidance was palpable, and their whispers grew louder. She no longer felt the warmth of their community, the bonds that once held them together. "She's changed," they said behind her back, and the words felt like daggers in her heart. She had become an outsider in her own life, a figure of tragedy and despair. The village had turned its back on her, but it was not just the villagers she feared now, it was herself. She could feel the darkness inside her growing, a darkness she had invited when she made the deal with Nira. It consumed her slowly, until she felt like a stranger in her own skin. The realization that she was no longer the woman she had once been gnawed at her every waking moment. She had traded her soul for the chance to feel whole again, and yet it had only hollowed her out. What was left of her now? Was there anything left to salvage, or had the damage been irreparable? Every day, the darkness inside her grew stronger, until it became too much to ignore. One evening, as Amma sat alone in the quiet of her home, a strange sensation washed over her. It was as though the very air had shifted, becoming thick with a foreboding energy. She glanced up, and to her shock, Kofi was standing in the doorway, his gaze fixed on her. For the first time in weeks, he looked at her, truly looked at her, but the expression on his face was not the one she remembered. It was cold, distant, almost unrecognizable. "Kofi?" Amma whispered, her voice trembling with both hope and fear. She reached out to him, her heart racing. "Please, come to me. Please remember me." But Kofi didn't move. He just stood there, watching her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't name. Amma's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for him to respond, but he didn't. Silence stretched between them like a vast chasm, and with each passing second, Amma could feel the distance between them widening, pulling them further apart. Was this the final cost of her decision? Had she lost her son forever, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well? The reality of the situation hit Amma like a crushing wave. She had done everything in her power to bring Kofi back, but in doing so, she had lost herself. She had traded her soul for the illusion of what could never be again. The magic had returned him, yes, but it had drained the very essence of who she was, leaving her empty and hollow. The bond she once shared with Kofi had been severed, and nothing, no amount of love, no amount of sacrifice could ever bring it back. "I made a mistake," Amma whispered to herself, her voice barely audible, filled with regret and sorrow. She had believed that bringing Kofi back would heal her, would restore the life she had lost, but instead, she had been left with only a shadow of what had once been. The darkness inside her grew, and with it, a deep, consuming realization. There was no redemption, no undoing the deal she had made. She had sacrificed everything for a second chance, but all she had gained was emptiness. The voices in her mind whispered that this was the price of desire, the cost of seeking something that was never meant to be. And in that moment, Amma knew there was no escape from the life she had chosen. Amma sat by the window, staring out into the night. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a cold, biting chill that seeped through the cracks of her home. The village was asleep, but the silence that surrounded her was deafening. She could feel it, the weight of the void that had settled within her. The air around her felt heavy, charged with a darkness that she could neither escape nor ignore. Kofi was there, but his presence was more like an illusion, a reflection of something she had lost. He didn't laugh. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat in the corner of the room, staring into nothingness. Amma's heart ached as she looked at him. The boy she had fought so desperately to bring back was now a mere shadow of the child she had once loved. She had brought him back, yes, but at what cost? Her soul had been torn from her, her humanity stripped away, and in the end, she was left with nothing but the hollow shell of a life she no longer recognized. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. There was no escape from the bargain she had made. She had traded everything for a fleeting moment of hope, but now all she had left was regret. Kofi was gone, and in his place was this cold, empty shell. And she too had become a shadow of herself. The days blended together as Amma sank deeper into her despair. She no longer felt the warmth of the sun on her skin or the comforting sounds of the world around her. She was numb to everything, including Kofi. She would go through the motions of caring for him, but the warmth she had once felt was gone. Each time she looked at him, the emptiness inside her grew, and with it, the weight of her decision. She had made the ultimate sacrifice to bring him back, but what had she truly gained? The love she had for him was no longer there, replaced by a deep, gnawing emptiness that she couldn't escape. The villagers had turned away from her, their eyes filled with fear and pity. They no longer trusted her, no longer saw her as the woman she had once been. "She's not the same," they whispered, their voices laced with judgment. The more time passed, the more Amma realized that the price she had paid was more than she could bear. The magic had returned Kofi, but it had also drained her. She was a shell, hollowed out by the choice she had made, and no amount of love, no amount of regret, could change what she had done. The village, the people she had once known, were all lost to her now. They were strangers, just as Kofi was. She had sacrificed everything to undo the loss of her son, but in the end, she had lost herself. One night, as the full moon rose high in the sky, Amma went to the forest again. The trees whispered in the wind, their branches swaying in a rhythm that seemed to echo the turmoil within her heart. She had made the journey before, but this time it was different. The air was thick with magic, a heavy presence that seemed to press down on her with every step. She could feel Nira's power lingering in the forest, a reminder of the bargain she had struck. She had come to confront the witch, to beg for a way out, to undo the damage she had done. "Nira," she called out into the darkness, her voice trembling. "I made the deal. I brought him back. But it's not enough." The witch's figure emerged from the shadows, her eyes glowing with the same cold light that had drawn Amma in the first time they had met. "You made your choice," Nira said softly, her voice like a whisper carried by the wind. "And now you must live with the consequences." Amma's heart sank as the witch stepped closer. "There is no undoing it," Nira continued. "The magic has taken its toll. There is no way back." Amma fell to her knees, her heart breaking. She had known this, but hearing it from the witch's lips felt like a final blow. She had made the ultimate sacrifice, and there was no redemption. She had lost everything. Ama's world had become a dark, empty place, and she could feel herself slipping away. The magic that had once filled her with hope had now become a curse, and with each passing day, the cost of her bargain grew heavier. Kofi still sat by the fire, staring into the flames, but it was no longer the boy she had loved. His eyes were distant, his soul empty, and the bond they had shared was lost forever. Ama had tried to reach him, to reconnect with him, but every attempt only deepened the gulf between them. The love she had once felt was gone, replaced by a hollow ache that gnawed at her every waking moment. She had sacrificed everything for a second chance, but there was no second chance. She had given up her soul for the illusion of redemption, and now she had nothing left. The villagers no longer spoke to her, no longer trusted her, and the world around her seemed to slip further and further out of reach. She had paid the price, and now there was no escape. Kofi was gone, and she was too. There was nothing left but the darkness that had consumed them both. Ama could feel the weight of her decisions pressing down on her like an unrelenting storm. The village had become a distant memory, its people now mere ghosts in her mind. The once familiar faces were nothing but shadows, their voices replaced by the echo of her own regrets. Kofi remained by the fire, but he had become even more distant. His presence was now a cold, unyielding reminder of the bargain she had struck. He no longer seemed like her son. The warmth that had once radiated from him had been replaced by an emptiness that mirrored her own. "Kofi," she whispered one evening, her voice thick with sorrow. She reached out to him, but he recoiled, his eyes not meeting hers. The emptiness inside her swelled, choking her breath. She had brought him back, but she had lost him in the process. There was no turning back now. The deal she had made with Nira had cost her more than she could have ever imagined. Kofi was no longer the child she had lost. He was a shadow of what he had once been, and so was she. Every day, the darkness that had taken root in her soul grew stronger, and she wondered if there was any part of her left to save. The village was now a distant memory, fading with each passing day. The whispers of the villagers no longer reached her ears, but the silence was even worse. They had abandoned her, as had the world. Ama wandered through the empty streets of the village, the once familiar paths now alien to her. The homes that had once felt like sanctuaries now felt like prisons, suffocating her with the weight of her choices. Kofi was never far from her, but his presence was no comfort. It was as if the very air around them had turned cold, and every step she took in the village only deepened the growing chasm between them. The connection they once shared had been severed, and all that remained was a hollow shell of the bond. Every glance she cast at Kofi felt like a dagger to her heart. The magic that had promised to bring him back had failed, and now all she had left was the painful realization that her actions had stripped them, both of what was most precious, the love they had shared. She had given up her humanity for a second chance, and now she had nothing. Kofi was with her, but he wasn't truly there, and neither was she. Night after night, Ama sat by the fire, staring into the flames that flickered and danced before her. The light seemed to mock her, its warmth too distant to touch her soul. Kofi sat in the corner, staring at the fire with an expression that could have been carved from stone. Ama no longer had the strength to try and reach him. The magic that had returned him had stolen everything from them both. Her thoughts swirled with regret and sorrow. What had she truly gained? The promise of Kofi's return had been a lie, a cruel trick played by the witch. She had given up her humanity, her connection to the world, and for what? A boy who no longer knew her? A shadow who could never be hers again. Ama's chest tightened with the unbearable weight of it all. Kofi was still with her, but the bond between them was gone. And what had she sacrificed in exchange for him? Her soul, her identity, and the very essence of who she had once been. She had paid the price, but it was too steep. There was no turning back. One night, as Amma sat alone in the dark, she felt the familiar presence of the shadows creeping into her thoughts. The darkness had become her constant companion, and now it whispered in her mind, urging her to accept the inevitable. "You can never go back," the voice hissed, its coldness seeping into her very bones. She had known this truth all along, but hearing it out loud was like a final blow. She had done this to herself, and now she had to live with the consequences. Kofi was lost to her, and so was she. The magic had taken everything: her son, her soul, her humanity. There was nothing left but the hollow, empty space that had once been filled with love. The world had abandoned her, and she had abandoned herself. The weight of that truth crushed her. "I've lost everything," she whispered into the night, her voice trembling with the finality of it. The silence that followed was deafening. She had no way to undo the damage. The bargain had been struck, and now there was nothing but the darkness she had invited into her life. Amma stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the horizon, but her thoughts were miles away. The village had grown even quieter, the once familiar paths now distant and unwelcoming. Kofi sat by the fire, staring at the flames as if they held the answers to everything, but he was as distant as ever. The magic had stolen more than just Kofi. It had stolen her soul. The nights had become the hardest. Amma would sit alone in the darkness, the room silent but for the crackling of the fire. Kofi never spoke. He never moved. He sat, staring into the flames, his eyes lifeless and empty. It was as though he had never truly returned. The boy she had loved, the child who had once filled her life with joy, was now nothing more than a shadow of his former self. She could feel the weight of his silence pressing on her chest. She had tried to reach him, to hold him, but every attempt had failed. His presence, though physically there, felt like a void. And in the silence of those long nights, she began to feel the enormity of what she had done. Her mind kept replaying the bargain she had struck with Nira. She had traded everything, the very core of who she was, for a fleeting chance to bring back what she had lost. But what had she really gained? Kofi had returned, but he wasn't the same. She had wanted to fix her world, but in the process, she had broken herself beyond repair. And now, all she had left was a shadow, a hollow version of the life she had once known. Amma wandered aimlessly through the village one evening, her heart heavy with the weight of her choices. The faces of the villagers no longer held the warmth they once did. They had stopped looking at her with sympathy long ago. Now they looked at her with fear, as though she were something to be avoided. "She's not the same," they whispered as she passed, their voices barely audible but still sharp enough to pierce her heart. The sting of their words was nothing compared to the emptiness she felt within herself. She had become a stranger in her own village, a woman who had lost everything in the pursuit of bringing back a child who could never be hers again. The air around her felt thick, suffocating, as though even the earth was rejecting her. The bargain she had made with the witch had not only cost her Kofi, but it had also severed her from everything she once loved: her village, her home, her humanity. She couldn't escape the truth. She had sacrificed her very soul for something that could never be truly returned. Kofi was a ghost, and so was she. There was nothing left but the empty shell of a life that had once been filled with hope. As the days turned to weeks, the finality of her decision became undeniable. Amma had lost everything: her son, her soul, her place in the world. There was no redemption, no undoing the bargain she had made. One evening, as she sat alone in the stillness of her home, the weight of her choices became too much to bear. She had once believed that bringing Kofi back would heal her, that it would make her whole again. But now she understood the true cost. Kofi was gone. The child she had loved was lost to her, and she had no one to blame but herself. The darkness that had consumed her was now all that remained. The voices of regret filled her mind, louder and louder, until they drowned out everything else. She had traded her soul for the illusion of a second chance, And now all that was left was the emptiness of that bargain. She had nothing left but the hollow ache in her chest and the bitter realization that she had made a choice that could never be undone. Thanks for watching till the end. If this story gave you goosebumps, give it a like and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're tuning in from. I read everyone. Till then, take care, folks.